Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Rochelle from Rochelle.Handmade.Designs, and there are many ways you can stay connected with me. The first place is on Instagram at Rochelle.Handmade.Designs. You can stay connected with me on my Facebook page at Rochelle.Handmade.Designs, or you can stay connected with me here on YouTube at Rochelle.Handmade.Designs, where you will find sewing tutorials, pattern hauls, fabric hauls, Friday sews, Black History Month pattern designers, and many more. You can also stay connected with me in one of my Facebook groups where I will post here. Now in today's video, we will be sewing that third skirt as part of the summer skirt series. This is the mini skirt utilizing New Look 6290. Now I will be doing view A because mine will not be completely a mini skirt. It will be more like a mid-thigh to knee skirt instead of a mini skirt. So I will be using view A, but you can use whatever view that you would like on this pattern for the skirt if you would like to use this pattern, or you can choose a pattern of your own choosing. It's completely up to you. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right on into the new video. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the supplies you will need in order to construct this mini skirt slash knee length skirt. Whatever length you want to make is a personal preference. So the first thing you're going to need is your pattern, which I am sewing along to New Look 6290. I'll be doing view B with the length of view A and maybe make it a little longer. It all depends. You will also need the pattern instructions as well. You need scissors, one for paper, one for fabric. Never mix the two there. I use rotary cutters to cut paper pattern as well as my fabric, so I never mix the two there. And then you need your basic sewing supplies, which will be your seam ripper, your point turner, and then I have chalk to mark my dart lines. I have pens, and then I have a thread clipper for the sewing machine. And the only other notion that you will need will be a 7-inch. You could use the invisible zipper, or you could use your all-purpose zipper, which is also an exposed zipper. So you can use whichever zipper you feel comfortable using. Now for this tutorial, I will be using the all-purpose zipper for this one because that was already in my stash. So that's all the supplies you will need for this mini skirt. So let's go ahead and talk about the pattern pieces. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is the cutting layout. Now, I will be doing view B on the pattern with the length of view A and maybe extend it just a little bit longer because for myself, it's not necessarily a mini skirt. It would be like a knee length skirt for me because I cannot wear mini skirts to work. All right, so first of all, I want to talk about the pattern pieces you will need. You will need pattern piece number 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's all the pattern pieces you will need. Pattern 3 and 4, you need to put the pattern with the wrong side up and then cut around, which I will show you that when I get into the pattern pieces. But I also want to make a note of a few things. The first thing I want to make a note of is how you cut your fabric. So make sure that you are cutting number 3 on the fold. If you're doing view A or B, you would cut pattern piece number 3 on the fold as well as number 1, and then 2 and 4, you would just need to cut 2 layers. So let's go ahead and talk about the pattern pieces. Okay, so let's talk about the pattern pieces you will need. There's only 4 pattern pieces, so I'm going to walk you through that, and then I'm also going to tell you the modifications I made to my pattern. So the pattern pieces you will need is pattern piece number 1, which is the front. You need to cut 1 on the fold of the fabric. So just make sure when you cut 1 on the fold, you have the pattern piece wrong side up and then cut all the way around your pattern. Okay, you also need pattern piece number 2, which is the back of your skirt. You need to cut 2 of fabric. You'll also need pattern piece number 3, which is your front facing. You need to cut 1 on the fold of the fabric with the wrong side up and then cut around. And the last pattern piece you will need is pattern piece number 4, which is the back facing. You need to cut 2 of fabric. Now, a couple of things I want to mention is if you look at the back of your pattern, you will notice that if you look at the very top, the waist measurement. So what you need to do is cut out according to the waist measurement. So let's take, for instance, the waist measurement. Now, for me, I'm cutting a size 16. Now, the waist measurement for a size 16, if you look at the top portion, is a 30. Well, my waist is the 33 and a half. And because I like to get a little room to where I'm not squeezing on a skirt, I will cut a 34 to give me a 1/2 inch room. Now, because this skirt does not give you a finished garment measurement for the waist, you need to look at the hip. So the hip for a 16 is a 43. Well, that's not big enough for me. My hips is a 44.5 inch. So for room and ease, I like to do a 46 inch hip measurement. So that means that I need to add 3 inches to my hips. And that means that I need to add 4 inches to my waist. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is grab pattern piece number 3 and 4, which is your front facing and your back facing. Now, because I needed to add 4 inches to my waist according to the pattern, I'm going to grab the pattern again. And on this pattern, it says that the finished waist would be a 30. I needed to add 4 inches. Now, if you think about it, you have a pattern piece, which is the front, which is pattern piece number 3, is cut on the fold. So that means that you have 2 side seams there. And then the back, you cut 2 to where you have another 2. So you have a total of 4 side seams. So you need to divide that 4 by 4. So the 4 inches that you need to add to fit comfortably around your waist, you need to divide that by 4. Now, if you need a 35, a 36 inch waist, you need to take that additional inches that you need. So let's just say, for instance, you need a 36 inch waist as your finished waist measurement. You need to take that 6 inches, divide that by 4. Whatever you get after you divide it by 4, you need to add that to your side seam. So your side seam is where the notch is. So you add that to the side seam. You only need to add that number. So let me grab a calculator quickly to show you. Okay, so let's say, for instance, that you have a finished waist measurement that you need of 6 inches. So you take that 6, divide it by 4, and it gives you 1.5 inches. So what you need to add to this side would be 1.5 inches. You need to measure it out and then draw your line and connect the top and the bottom. You would do the same thing to the back pattern piece, which is 1.5 inches. You would do the same thing to that piece. So those will be the front and back facing pieces that you would add 1.5 inches to if your waist is a 36 inch. Now let's go over to pattern piece 1 and 2, and let me show you how you add the inches there as well. Okay, so I grabbed pattern piece number 1. So if you notice, it just gives you a finished hip measurement of 43. Now, this is the waist right up at the top. Now, remind you, I added 1 inch to the side of mine because I need to make it a 34. So I need to add that 1 inch to the very top at the waist and make a dot. So I made a dot and made a line to come down. All right, you need to do that. If yours is 1.5 inches, you need to make right at the waistline, you need to measure out 1.5 inches. So the waistline is at the very top, right here at this corner. You need to measure 1.5 inches, put a dot there. Now, because my hips, I needed to add a total of 3 inches to get a 46. So I would take that 3 inches and divide that by 4, and it gives me 3/4 of an inch. So I would measure out 3/4 of an inch here at the hips, and then make sure that I connect my waist measurement, which is right here, to my hip measurement, which is here. And then I want to make sure that I taper it off at the end and go all the way up. Now, because I added length to mine, it's going to go from that length all the way up to the hip. So I'm going to show you that now. Okay, so I hope you can see this better. I turned it sideways so you can see it a little better. All right, so at the top, so let's just use a 36 inch waist, and then I'm gonna use a 46 inch hip, and then the length. Now, I lengthened my entire skirt by 4 inches. I did that to the front pattern piece and the back pattern piece to give me the length that I want. So what I need to do is I'm gonna use my measurement, just use yours as an example. So I'm gonna use a waist of a 34 inch and a hip of a 46 inch. 47 inches is what I'm going to use for my hip. So at the very top where the waist is, I added 1 inch to get, so if you multiply that by 4, it gives me a 34 inch waist. At the hips, I added 1 1/4, which is 1.25. If you multiply that by 4, it gives me an additional 5 inches, which gives me now a 48 inch. Now I could take it out if I feel like the hips is too big. I could take it in. Now, if I made it too small, I cannot make it bigger. So I'd rather make it a little bit bigger to allow for room and take it in if I need to, instead of not adding enough ease for that. Okay, so I'm added 5 inches to my hip measurement, adding 1 1/4 inch at the hip because my hip is a 44.5. I wanted to give a little bit of room. All right, being that I'm working with a cotton fabric. And then what I wanted to let you know is the bottom, which is the hem. So what I did is I took the hem right here and made sure I used my hip curve ruler to curve it back to the hip and all the way up to the waist. So that's how you would adjust your pattern, because I know for the last skirt, there were many questions regarding what size I cut and how I was able to modify the pattern in order to get a good fit. So I wanted to explain that in this skirt, moving along on how you do that. Okay, so if you still have any questions, you can always send me a DM on Instagram, or you can leave a comment below and I'll be sure to make sure to get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Now that I talked about the pattern pieces and what you need to do, let's go ahead and get started with the sewing. All right, so the first thing you need to do is go ahead and stay stitch the upper edge of both your front and back pattern piece. Stay stitching is done at a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So go ahead and stay stitch the front and the back of your pattern pieces. After you do that, you're going to go ahead and make your darts. Now I have already done this, but what you're going to do is go ahead and make your darts, and then you're going to stitch down. Once you make your darts, you're going to press your dart in towards the center. So for your front pattern piece, you're going to press it in towards the center. And I'm going to show you the back pattern piece. So for the back pattern piece, you're going to press it towards the center. Now your center is where you would put your zipper in. So this little curve area right here, do not press your dart that direction. Press your dart towards the straight edge on this side, on one, and then on the other side of your back. So I'm going to show you the back pattern pieces as well. So you're going to press this dart towards this side seam. I'm sorry, this center seam, center back seam. And then you're going to press this dart towards your center back seam that way. So make sure you press your darts in the right direction. So now that you have done that with right sides together, you're going to pin your front to your back at the side seams. So go ahead and grab your back pattern pieces, and with right sides together, you're going to pin at the center back seam. So pin at the top. Make sure you pin at your notches. You should have a notch right there. So pin at your notch, pin at the bottom, and then pin the length of your skirt. Now that you have your skirt pinned, you're going to back stitch at the beginning using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and finish off your seam allowance. Do that to both side seams. Okay, so now that I have sewn my side seams, what you want to do is go ahead and sew your center back seam. So with right side together, you're going to pin at the center back seam. Now, with my side seam, I did press my side seam to the back of my, the seam allowance to the back of my garment instead of to the front. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin the center back seam at the notch. And then I'm going to pin at the top and the bottom, and then pin the entire seam of my center back seam. So go ahead and pin. All right, so now that your center back seam is pinned, what you want to do is, starting at the hem, you're going to back stitch at the hem, back stitch at the beginning, come all the way up to where your notch is, which is right here, back stitch right here, switch to a basting stitch, and then baste from the notch all the way up. So once again, you're going to back stitch at the hem using a regular length stitch and 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the hem, come all the way up to where your notch is, back stitch at this notch, switch to a basting stitch, and then baste all the way up to the top. So go ahead and do that. Now I do want to make a note before you go ahead and stitch your center back seam. Go ahead and finish off your seam allowance because this is where your zipper is going to be. So before you attach the center back seam together, sew them together, go ahead and finish off your seam allowance first and then attach them together. So go ahead and do that. Okay, so I went ahead and finished off my center back seam. I sewn my seams together, 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, stitch from the bottom to that dot. Now, one thing I did do is I went ahead and basted it and then pressed my seams open and apply interfacing to my zipper edge. Now, go ahead and open out those basting stitches simply because you need to attach your facing pieces in order before you attach your zipper. So go ahead, and if you did what I did and baste it from that notch all the way up, go ahead and pick out using Mrs. Seam Ripper. Go ahead and pick those out so you can go ahead and attach your facing pieces. All right, so now that we have our skirt portion pretty much done, go ahead and put this to the side and grab your facing pieces. So now you're going to need pattern piece number 3 and 4, which is your facing pieces, and it's just like any other facing or waistband that you do. So with right sides together, you're going to attach pattern piece number 3 to pattern piece number 4. So this is my front, pattern piece number 3. And you're going to attach pattern piece number 4 right on top, making sure you match up the notches on the side. So go ahead and match up your notches on both sides. And using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and then press your seams open. Okay, so I went ahead and attached my front facing to my back facing, right sides together, attached it using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then press my seams open. So now at this point, you can go ahead and add your label if you have one. So this is what your facing should look like. Now I like to attach a label to the right side of my center back seam. So center back facing. So what I am doing is I'm attaching a label right here. So I make sure to measure about 1.25 inches from the center back seam. I put my label facing down to where and stitch 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and then I turn it up and encase this, fold this top portion over, and then sew again 1/4 of an inch away. So that's how I sew my label on. Now, once you add your label, if you have one, go ahead and serge or finish off however you choose the bottom edge of your facing piece. So go ahead and do that. Okay, I went ahead and finished off my label. I went ahead and serged the bottom edge of my facing piece. So go ahead and grab your skirt because you're almost done. And what you're going to do is go ahead and turn your skirt right side out. And what you want to do is attach your facing to your skirt with right sides together. So what you want to do is you should have 2 notches at the center front seam. You want to match that up. So go ahead and match up your notch. So I'm going to start right here at the center back seam. There's a notch right there. So I'm going to match up that notch and make sure you are pinning and you have your garment right sides facing. So make sure it's right sides facing and you're attaching correctly. Now make sure you are attaching the side seams, and then you're going to pin all the way around your skirt. Now, if you did what I did and sewn your side seam together, make sure that seam allowance for your skirt is facing the back of your skirt instead of to the front. All right, so now that you have your facing pinned to your skirt, you're going to start at the back, center back seam. And so using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning, so all the way around your skirt, and back stitch at the end. Now, one thing I do want to mention is do not have your skirt pressed in. Make sure you pull the skirt seam allowance and the center back out to make sure that you are matching up your facing pieces. Do not have the skirt turned onto itself. Make sure you pull that out and match up the facing pieces to the top. And go ahead and attach your facing to your skirt now using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so now that I have my facing sewn onto my skirt, what I'm gonna do is go ahead and trim down this seam allowance to about 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So go ahead and do that. All right, so now that I have went ahead and trimmed my seam allowance down, so what you're going to do is go ahead and press your seam allowance up towards your facing, and then you want to understitch on your facing at about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, catching in that seam allowance. So make sure you press your seam allowance up towards your facing, and then go ahead and do your understitching. Okay, so I went ahead and did my facing. I went ahead and understitched on my facing. So the next thing you want to do is, what I would suggest you do is go ahead and try on your skirt to see if it fits. Once you try on your skirt to see if it fits or if you need to make any changes. So if you need to make any changes, what you would need to do is go ahead and take off a little bit of your facing. So pick out some of your understitching, and then you want to sew your center back seam to fix wherever you need to fix at, because if you take from your side seam, then you would need to redo the facing piece. So I would just pick out the facing piece a little bit and change your center back seam if you need to, if it's too big. Go ahead and sew, instead of 5/8 of an inch, maybe you need a 1 inch seam allowance instead. But that's a personal preference. You would need to make those corrections and adjustments to the center back seam, and then go ahead and re-stitch your facing piece, and it should fit better. And then try it on, see if it fits, and then if you need to make any more adjustments, that would be something that you would need to do before you attach your zipper and everything. Now, once you have your facing sewn on, understitch, you're going to press the understitch. Go ahead and place your basically put your facing to the inside and press on your facing. So go ahead and press your facing to the inside now. Okay, so what I did was I went ahead and pressed my facing to the inside of my skirt. And then I went ahead and based the ends of the facing, the back ends of the facing down. So now what I'm going to do is go ahead and turn my skirt wrong side out. So go ahead and turn your skirt wrong side out. And then what you want to do is go ahead and, with right sides together, you want to pin from that notch all the way up to the very top of your skirt. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have that back zipper area pinned together, I'm going to baste from that notch all the way up to the top of the skirt. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so I went ahead and basted from the notched edge all the way up to the top portion of my skirt. I'm gonna go ahead and grab my zipper, and with right side of zipper facing the right side of my zipper, I'm gonna turn my skirt sideways so you can see this. So I'm gonna make sure that my zipper pull is out of my way, and I'm just going to pin on the side with the zipper on the seam allowance. So I'm gonna make sure that the center of my zipper is on the center of that seam line, and I'm going to pin. And I'm just going to pin all the way up to the top portion of my zipper. Now, if you're using an invisible zipper, you would pretty much do the same thing, but you would just finish it off a little different. But I am doing the installation for the exposed zipper only, not the invisible zipper. All right, so now that I have it pinned, I'm gonna go to my sewing machine, and I'm just going to baste just along the seam allowance. So do not catch your skirt, just the seam allowance, and just baste the zipper onto the seam allowance on both sides of the zipper. So go ahead and do that. All right, so now that I have my zipper basted onto my skirt, what I'm gonna do is go ahead and take the seam ripper out and rip out the basting stitches. So go ahead and do that on yours. All right, so now that I have my zipper basted on, I'm gonna open it out. And now that it's completely basted on, what I'm going to do is top stitch close to the zipper. So I'm just going to top stitch going down one side, square off across, and then up the other side. So go ahead and do that to your zipper. Okay, so now that you have top stitched on your zipper, you probably cannot see mine because I have used white thread on mine. What you want to do is go ahead and take out the basting stitches that you had on the back part of the facing piece. And what you want to do is go ahead and finish off that zipper area. So what you're going to do, I'm going to show you on one side because I have mine's pinned because I'm going to finish it off. So what you want to do is have your zipper turned onto it. And then you're going to take the top portion of your zipper and fold it over the facing piece. Then you want to take this back piece and fold it in. And then pin. Now, one thing you want to do before you sew your zipper in place is you want to zip it up to make sure that one side is not higher than the other side. So when you turn it over, you want to make sure that your left is not higher than your right and vice versa, your right higher than your left. So you don't want to do that. So once you have finished off your zipper by folding it over, what you want to do is what I'm going to do is go ahead and top stitch one last time over, down and across and back up to make sure that it's secured in place. Once you do that, the only thing that's left for you to do is do your hem. You're going to press up 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, press to that line, and then fold it in again to secure it. Now, what I'm going to do is press up 1 inch instead of 5/8 of an inch because I did allow for a 1 inch seam allowance. Once you stitch your hem in place, you are all done. Well, there you have it. You just finished sewing your third skirt as part of that summer skirts series. So like, comment, and subscribe, and also turn on the notification bell so you are notified every time I upload a new video. So until next time.